With the offseason program in the books and training camps just around the corner, which Seahawks are facing the most pressure heading towards the 2024 season? I'm going to bust out our annual Hot Seat Index, taking a look at which players have the most at stake going into the season on a Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you're listening in from Woodland, Singapore, or British Columbia, we greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We're drawing closer to the start of training camp, less than 4 weeks until rookies report. Going to be diving into which veterans have the most at stake and are facing the most pressure as they head towards the start of training camp. And going to be dishing out my latest 53-man roster projection. That'll be coming your way courtesy of our friends over at the Game Time app. Without further ado, now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. We've reached the stage of the offseason where all 32 NFL teams have wrapped up OTAs and minicamp. Nobody's practicing. This is the dead time in the summer, the moratorium, so to speak, for NFL players. Not quite as long as usual for the Seahawks, with rookies set to report on July 17th. And with the Seahawks reporting a little bit earlier, that means we're going to be seeing the Seahawks back on the field before you know it. And there are a number of veterans that are going to be heading into this year's training camp that are going to be battling to keep their roster spot, that aren't necessarily givens to make this football team. And as we do each and every year, sometimes we do this in the middle of training camp as well, we bust out the Hot Seat Index. And we're going to be looking at the temperature as the temperatures are rising outside. Officially the first day of summer today. With the temps rising, we'll see what those temps look like for 5 different Seahawks veterans that may very well be on the bubble heading towards training camp. And I want to start things off with a player who, whether fair or not, he has been heavily scrutinized by fans during his 4 seasons with the team. He did not play at all in his rookie season, coming back from a broken leg suffered at Tennessee, and then turned around and had a decent season his first year playing, 6.5 sacks, then had 9.5 sacks in 2022. Last year slipped back into 5.5 sacks. Darrell Taylor's had an inconsistent career at best for the Seahawks. And of course, the biggest detriment for him has been his run defense. He's lost his starting job each of the last 2 years as one of the outside linebackers for the Seahawks, in large part because teams have been able to run the football effectively at him. He's been not able to get off blocks. He's been physically overwhelmed at times. He's taken some guesses with his gaps that have led to big plays, missed tackles, you name it. The run defense aspect has been an issue for him. So where things stand right now, I've got Darrell Taylor at 98%. That's pretty darn hot. We're not quite to triple digits yet, but the reason that I think the temperature is this high heading towards the start of training camp, you got a couple reasons. One, Draymond Jones is going to be getting a lot more opportunities off the edge than what he has in the past. And that's going to be keeping Darrell Taylor off the field, especially when you have Draymond Jones filling in gaps that were previously held for Taylor and Derek Hall. You're going to have Uchenna Nwosu coming back. You've got Boye Mafe returning for his 3rd season after having 9 sacks a year ago. This is going to be a challenge for Darrell Taylor to get onto the field. And making this roster might even be difficult because there's a name to keep an eye on. Nelson Caesar, the undrafted rookie out of Houston, who is a solid all-around player, does not have the athletic traits, the burst, the speed that Taylor brings to the equation, but he was a very productive player at Houston, led the Big 12 in sacks last year. So I don't think that Darrell Taylor is necessarily locked up a spot on this football team, especially with a new coaching staff. He's got a lot to prove. Certainly could go out there and play better against the run, and then he keeps his roster spot. But I think that the seat is pretty darn hot for him. Going to the offensive side of the football, next up on my hot seat meter, heading towards training camp, going to go to the offensive line, Stone Forsythe. And I will admit, last year, Forsythe was the winner of my most improved player on offense when we did our end of season awards. He started 8 games at right tackle And I thought he played pretty solid in a number of those games. Wasn't a star by any means, and he certainly had some rougher games than others where he gave up a lot of pressures, gave up sacks, had some penalty issues. But I thought he was one of the more improved players in Seattle's roster last year, given the opportunities that were granted to him by Abraham Lucas's injuries. But now you fast forward to the present, and the former 6th-round pick out of Florida could potentially be on his way out because of George Fant coming to town. He's going to be your new swing tackle, assuming that Lucas is back healthy for the start of the season. Things are trending that direction with the latest update he had on Instagram. So George Fant being the swing tackle, you've got players like McLennan Curtis that have played some tackle previously, and Forsythe is in the last year of his contract. Seattle may be more inclined to keep somebody like 6th-round pick Mike Darrell on the roster, who's got 4 years of club control at a cheap price. Forsythe is going to have to earn the job to stay on this roster, and certainly made improvement last year. But I'm looking right now, he is around the low 90s. Certainly a hot seat, but survivable conditions. If he's able to go out there and play well, build off of last season, then on this roster. George Fant coming in, him being in his last year of his contract, there are some variables here that certainly could be working against him. Going back to the defensive side of the football, maybe the most popular player that's been referenced in these hot seat alerts, regardless of where you read or listen, Coby Bryant. I've got him squarely at 100 degrees. And you look at the cornerback group, he hasn't even been working with the corners during the offseason program. And look at the players he would be competing against. You got Devin Witherspoon, Reek Woolen, Mike Jackson, Trey Brown. You get 2 incoming rookies, Nehemiah Pritchett, DJ James, and then you've got Artie Burns as well. There just isn't anywhere for Coby Bryant to play right now at the cornerback spot. So he has been seeing all of his reps as a second and third team safety, doing a lot of work alongside Kayvon Wallace, who was signed in free agency. This is a very hot seat, but the reason that I'm not going to go above 100, this is not the hottest temp that I've got on this hot seat alert, is because of the injury to Jarek Reed II. Coming back from a torn ACL, my understanding is there's a chance he could come back at some point in training camp, but it's looking more likely that he's probably going to miss the early portion of the season because of how late that injury happened last year. Not going to be quite there yet. If that's the case, Jarek Reed II not being available, that opens up a roster spot for Coby Bryant to be able to transition fully into that safety position. And because he's played corner, has started games at slot corner, that versatility is invaluable. So I think right now he would be on the right side of the bubble, but this is definitely a hot seat, especially if Jarek Reed II comes back healthy in training camp and looks good. He's a natural safety, unlike Coby Bryant. That could really make things interesting for a player who already looks to be off of the depth chart at cornerback. And going back to offense, and this is also special teams, maybe the most maligned player on Seattle's roster the last couple of years, D. Eskridge. His is Phoenix temperatures right now. We're looking at 112 degrees. Can't be out there very long, or you're going to be in a world of hurt. That is where D. Eskridge is at right now, because not only at the receiver position, you've now got Laviska Shenault that you got to deal with, who has been much more productive in his NFL career. Jake Bobo, I think, is pretty much a lock at this point, maybe 99% of the roster. Derek Young offers more on special teams with his gunner ability on punt coverage, the tackles that he made on kick coverage. He can also play a number of spots on offense. There's a lot working against D. Eskridge here. And like Darrell Taylor, like Stone Forsythe, he's in the last year of his contract. He's already had it restructured to be a bit more favorable salary cap-wise. Maybe that ends up saving him. If he's the best kick returner, then he can notch a spot on the team. But there's going to be plenty of competition there. So with the fact he had no catches last year, this is truly the last strike for D. Eskridge. Is he going to be able to handle the heat? To this point, he has not been able to. And to me, the hot seat is warmest for this particular player. And then on defense, I'm mentioning this player because earlier on social media I asked which player has the most to prove or who's under the most pressure. And one name that was frequently brought up was Mike Jackson. And I'm going to tell you right now, Mike Jackson, to me, is in perfect temperatures. He's on the beach, 75 degrees with a little bit of breeze. I don't see any way that Mike Jackson's roster spot is in jeopardy unless somebody comes and offers them a late-round pick and they can't turn down that trade. He is not going to be cut. This is a junkyard dog that just doesn't go away. Every time you think Mike Jackson is going to be released or that he's going to be knocked down a peg or two on the depth chart, he just keeps coming back for more. And he's a physical player. He's going to get his opportunities to compete with Trey Brown for that other outside starting spot when they are in their nickel positions. And I think he's got a chance maybe to be in a platoon with Brown. He has started 21 games the last 2 years. I just don't see him being a player, especially with the way that he plays, that relentless grind and the toughness, the physicality that he brings. I can't see him being a guy that's going to be on the chopping block. So I think his seat is lukewarm. He is feeling good. He's on the beach enjoying this depth that the Seahawks have at cornerback and being part of it. So I don't see him on the outside looking in unless a trade partner comes up and Seahawks get a deal they can't turn down. To me, Mike Jackson is going to be on this football team in 2024. Up next, going to shift gears to the 53-man roster. Had a projection in the middle of OTAs. A few changes this time around in my latest projection as we head full steam ahead to training camp. I'll get to that here in a moment on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode of Locked On Seahawks is brought your way by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy and also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts. For your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every single time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Now less than 4 weeks away from report day for Seahawks rookies. It's time for my latest 53-man roster projection. Now, it's only been a month since my last one, but that was before the end of OTAs, before minicamp. A lot of things can change during the offseason program. There's been a few guys come back from injuries. There's a few guys who we have questions about where they're going to be at when training camp opens. So starting on the offensive side of the football, I just talked about a couple of these players that may or may not be included in the 53-man roster projection, but I want to start on the offensive line. And the biggest change for me compared to a month ago, I really believe Abraham Lucas now is going to be ready for week one. In fact, I'm very confident about that. With him being healthy, George Fant is going to be maybe the best swing tackle in the NFC. You're talking a guy that's got over 1,000 reps at both the left and right tackle position. He is going to be your swing tackle. And I mentioned Stone Forsythe, the situation he's in, where he made improvements last year, but he's not going to be somebody that offers guard versatility. He's in the last year of his contract. I have a feeling the three players competing at right guard right now, Christian Haynes, Anthony Bradford, and McClendon Curtis, I think all three of those guys can make this football team right now. The Seahawks have at least 2 years of club control for every single one of those players, including McClendon Curtis, who has played some tackle previously at the college and NFL level. So he offers more versatility than Forsythe does. Anthony Bradford's played both guard spots. Christian Haynes, even though he's just right guard, I think he could play left guard. Absolutely. He played some center at the Senior Bowl. I think all three of these young guys make this football team if I had to make a projection right now. And I think Sataoa Laumea, the sixth rounder from Utah, another player that started 2 full years as a tackle at Utah, also has 2 years as a guard. He brings a lot of positional versatility. Scott Huff is a big fan of him. I don't think they're going to want to risk losing him off of waivers, and he could be your long-term starter at left guard. So I have Laumea as well as McClendon Curtis making this football team over Stone Forsythe in my latest projection. And it could be close, but I think having a player like Mike Jarrell, who they've got a good chance to sneak to the practice squad, Garrett Greenfield as well, they've got some other young tackles with more club control. And I just don't know that Stone Forsythe fits into what the Seahawks are going to be doing at this point because he doesn't offer that positional versatility. He can't play both tackle spots, but there's no guard, certainly can't play center. there are some other guys in this roster that can play multiple spots along the line, and that is crucial for backups. As far as the skill positions go on offense, no real changes for me at this point. In fact, quarterback, receiver, running back, all of these stay the same for my last projection. D. Eskridge being left out in favor of Derek Young. I just think he gives the Seahawks more on special teams, and he is a guy that can move around some. He had 2 catches 2 years ago, hasn't been involved in the offense very much, but a very good special teams player. And you've got 2 full years of club control still left in his contract. Eskridge, you've only got 1. So I have Young, Chenault, and Bobo being the 3 reserve receivers that make it behind Metcalf, Smith, and Jigba, and Lockett. As for the backfield, George Halati to me is the dark horse to watch, but running backs you can often slip to the practice squad. So I think Seattle keeps 3 with Kenny McIntosh being the 3rd down back behind Ken Walker III and Zach Charbonnet. And PJ Walker, I think, is a prime candidate to stash back on the practice squad and have a proven experienced starter available as an insurance policy. So you keep Geno Smith and you keep Sam Howell as your 2 quarterbacks on the 53, and PJ Walker is available in a pinch off your practice squad. As for the defensive side of the football, with some of the changes I had on offense, including only keeping 3 tight ends, I was able to keep 26 defensive players. And I think when you look at the injury situation for the Seahawks right now, especially at linebacker, Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker haven't participated at all in the offseason program. They're expected back early in training camp. But I think that there are some defensive positions, safety as well, with Jarek Reed II not being back, where you're going to have a very competitive race for those reserve spots. And I could see Seattle keeping an extra linebacker or an extra safety out of training camp because of some of those injury concerns. And quite frankly, more of your special teams guys are on this side of the ball. So on the defensive line, my big surprise, I don't know if this is a surprise because Darrell Taylor was one of the last ones in on my last projection. I just think Nelson Caesar is going to be a player that this coaching staff is going to like too much to cut him loose. And Darrell Taylor, I just don't know that I see the scheme fit, especially with the run defense issues he's had. So I'm picking Nelson Caesar in this projection to be the undrafted rookie that makes the roster over Darrell Taylor. I just think he's got a more versatile all-around game. He's not the athlete Darrell Taylor is, but he uses his tools well. He has great fundamentals. He is physical. I think that Nelson Caesar is going to make this football team. And in the interior, same guys as I had in the last one. I've still got Mike Morris beating out Miles Adams. I've got Cameron Young, even though he's missed all of OTAs and minicamp. I think the Seahawks are high enough on him that he makes the team as the backup nose tackle behind Jonathan Hankins. And, of course, you've got Jaron Reed, Byron Murphy, and Leonard Williams to shore things up in that front line. As for the linebackers and secondary, here's my other significant surprise. I'm going to keep 5 inside linebackers in this simulation because, as I mentioned, we don't know where Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker are at. Tyrese Knight is an untested 4th-round pick that may take some time to be ready for the field. John Radigan and Patrick O'Connell have gotten all the reps in the first-team defense, and they're both notable special teams players. With some guys like Nick Bellore not being here anymore, there's going to be a void there. I think Radigan and O'Connell can both fill that as really good special teams cogs that also can play defense in a pinch if needed, and you can still allow Tyrese Knight to have the time to develop before he is ready to go. Corner, I've got exactly the same as my last projection. Witherspoon and Woolen as the starters. Trey Brown, Mike Jackson competing for that 3rd spot when they're in nickel. And I think DJ James and Nehemiah Pritchett. I've seen enough from both of these guys to this point in OTAs and minicamp to be excited about their upside. I think they both will contribute on special teams as well. So both them make the team over. Artie Burge is one of the last ones that is out. And then at safety, same as last time as well. Rayshon Jenkins, Julian Love, the starters, Kayvon Wallace, and Kobe Bryant in this instance. He benefits from Jarek Reed still not being back, and he also has that cornerback experience and versatility to go with that. So Bryant and Wallace make it as the backup safeties. Only real position where there's absolutely no drama is the specialist, Jason Myers, Michael Dixon, and Chris Stahl. All those guys are going to be on the roster. They don't have any competition at their respective positions, but that rounds out the 53-man roster with one player, Jarek Reed II, being on the PUP list. There could be some other guys that are candidates for that, but at this point, all the other players that have been bagged up, I think will get back early in training camp, including Abraham Lucas, and we'll get to see them on the field, hopefully, against the Denver Broncos on September 8th. I'm going to continue our 90-player countdown. That'll be coming up next. Going to be looking at numbers 64 through 62. Don't go away. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s that's tuning in, listening. As always, thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Continuing our 90-player countdown, we got a couple more undrafted rookies going to be looking at today. Going to be kicking off the festivities here. Number 64, a name that's a popular one in the Pacific Northwest. Jack Westover, one of the key cogs for the Huskies' high-powered offense the last 2 years, finished with 44 receptions and 4 touchdowns last year, always seemed to come through in the clutch, and he's got a major advantage over his teammates coming into his rookie season because he played for Ryan Grubb, the new offensive coordinator for the last 2 years. He knows his offense inside and out. Veterans have been leaning on Westover to this point. As the veterans catch up, then obviously that advantage isn't as big, but that's certainly working in his favor, and the fact that he's been a blocker, he's been asked to do so, especially in space. He's got some formational flexibility. Jack Westover is certainly a player that I think has a good chance to make this football team. The only thing that may be working against him is the fact that Seattle drafted A.J. Barner in the 4th round out of Michigan, who is viewed as more of an inline blocking tight end. He can help replace Will Dissly. They signed Pharaoh Brown, who, from all that I've seen in OTAs and minicamp, he's a player that they're really excited to have in the fold, and he's a good locker room guy as well. I don't know that they're going to hold 4 tight ends. Westover's really going to have to prove himself on special teams. He's not the biggest guy either. So if Seattle ends up keeping a 4th tight end, Westover very much in the mix here. I would like him to make this team over Tyler Mabry or Brady Russell at this point. But the number of tight ends in the roster, especially with this team unlikely to play as much 2 and 3 tight end stuff as what they did with Shane Waldron as the coordinator the last couple of years, that is going to be working against him. I think best case scenario, though, this guy just plays too well in the preseason and training camp. The knowledge of Ryan Grubb's offense helps Westover out immensely, and he gets a bunch of catches, a couple touchdowns in the preseason, and he just plays too well to not make the football team. I expect the worst case scenario that he sticks around on the practice squad. He's going to have enough credibility there with the offensive coordinator. They're going to want to continue developing him. An injury happens. This is a guy you can plug and play that knows the offense, clearly has soft hands, comes through in the clutch. So I expect him to be with the Seahawks one way or another coming out of training camp. I think he's got a chance to make this team, but what's hurting him is the fact that this is probably going to be a 3 tight end position. I don't know they hold 4. Special teams is going to be critical in that. Up next, a player that missed all of last season, but at one point offered plenty of intrigue, coming from Framingham State, which was a Division III school in Massachusetts. Joshua Oniogu missed all of last year with an elbow injury, and this was a guy that I had highlighted going into training camp last year as a dark horse to watch because he did get to dress for a game. He played in Germany against the Buccaneers as a rookie a couple years ago. He was a surprise addition to the 53-man roster for about 24 hours at a camp before Seattle decided to cut him, and then he ended up on the practice squad. But the organization has been high on him, and he's got good size. He's got burst for outside linebacker. He just looks the part of an NFL 3-4 outside linebacker, but he's coming off a significant injury, and I'm wondering if he's going to be as good of a scheme fit in Mike McDonald's defense. I do think he's got that build of a 3-4 outside linebacker, but I want to see how he fits in this scheme, how the Seahawks plan to deploy him. Not a guy that's going to offer you a ton of value dropping back into coverage either. So I'm questioning whether or not in this particular hybrid 3-4, if he's going to be able to stick and stand out. But certainly he was a player that exceeded expectations 2 years ago. He's fully healthy. He's been participating in OTAs and mini camps. So you've got him back on the field. This guy's got good size. There's some traits. You've got some film from the preseason a few years ago where he looked pretty good against NFL competition. Can he do it again and impress a new coaching staff? I don't view him as a player that has a chance to make this football team unless there's some injuries in front of him. But I think getting back in the practice squad is definitely a possibility for further development and might be somebody that jumps out to a few other teams where he may be a little better scheme fit if he plays well in the preseason. So I can certainly see this guy being in the NFL for a few more seasons minimum. Maybe it's in Seattle. I think it's going to be tough to make the 53, though, with the current depth chart and the fact that we didn't get to see him at all last season. And rounding out this latest cluster of 90-man countdown profiles, this is somebody I mentioned earlier that I have making this football team, and it's in large part because I walked away from OTAs and minicamp extremely impressed by Patrick O'Connell, the second-year linebacker out of Montana. Now, this is a player last year that I had highlighted as maybe one of the undrafted rookies who had a chance to make Seattle's football team. And part of the reason was if you go back and watch Montana's tape, I mean, Montana is one of the juggernauts in the FCS level. This guy had a double-digit sack season for the Grizzlies. He was multi-time all-conference selection, got some All-American dibs in there as well. He's played off-ball. He's played as an edge. He's got some positional flexibility, and he's a really good athlete at the position, which I think is going to be crucial for any of these linebackers trying to make this football team. Mike McDonald likes guys that can run sideline to sideline, that can blitz effectively, can drop back in coverage, and they can handle the athleticism of slot receivers and tight ends. Patrick O'Connell has a lot of those traits working for him. He's small, just a little over 230 pounds. That's the biggest detriment to his game, but he's played some special teams. He got into a handful of games last year to get special teams reps for the Seahawks off the practice squad. So he's played a few NFL games. And I just think the uncertainty at the top of that depth chart, all the youth that Seattle has at that position, that there's a really good chance if O'Connell can continue to build off what he did, particularly in minicamp, 3 pass breakups, one of them leading to an interception, was all over the place. If he can continue to do that when the pads come out and has a really good preseason, shows up on special teams once again, I think he's got a chance to make this football team and be one of the inside linebackers. Maybe he's ahead of John Radigan at this point because you have more club control and he's going to be cheaper. And that certainly is an interesting storyline that bears watching. But I think O'Connell's athleticism, the fact that he has that background where he is rushed off the edge, the Seahawks aren't going to be asking him to do that. He's not big enough to do that in the NFL. But from a blitzing standpoint, he's got some of those instincts and skills to be able to get after people and get to the quarterback. And that was such a big part of Baltimore's defense the last few years of their linebackers. O'Connell projects to fit this scheme well. I've been impressed from what I've seen on the practice field. If that carries over into late July and into August in the preseason games, then he's going to dramatically improve his chances of making the Seahawks in 2024. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up next week, we will continue our training camp preview. On Monday, we'll be diving into the edge rusher group as we continue to look on defense and we draw closer to the start of the 2024 season. Enjoy your weekend, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.